All right. Can people hear me all right?
I can.
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't see the chat. So welcome and good morning. This is our VCAP spring training. It is titled Back to the Basics, How to Conduct a Site Visit and What BMP Goes Where. So we'll give that brief overview of how to prepare for and conduct a site visit and what to look for and how to determine which BMP might be most applicable to the location. My name is Darby Reed. I am the VCAP Assistant Coordinator here at the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Here today, we also have VCAP Coordinator Blair Blanchett. We also have Richard Jacobs from Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation District. He is a member of the steering committee as well as the technical advisory committee. And we also have Judy Frazier, who is a member of the steering committee as well. All these folks are here today to help answer questions towards the end of the presentation. Our agenda for the day, we have the welcome, introduction. I have a goal for this presentation. We'll review the VCAP BMPs that we're focusing on. We'll look at an example scenario. We'll go through what to do before a site visit, how to prepare, what to do at the site visit, and things to consider. We'll have a brief discussion, then look at next steps, the resources for soil and water conservation districts, and then questions. So the goal of this presentation is to provide district staff with the tools and information they need to confidently go on a site visit and provide the property owner with their best stormwater management practice recommendations. So VCAP offers a lot of BMPs or a lot of BMP options for reimbursement. However, again, today we're going to look at a few specific BMPs, mostly the interchangeable ones. So we'll look at some of the conservation landscapings, dry wells, infiltration, bioretention, vegetative conveyance systems, such as wet swale and dry swale, and rain gardens. So we are focusing on those BMPs today because the other BMPs aren't as interchangeable, right? So you would know when you would need a riparian buffer next to a river or a living shoreline on the shore. Folks who reach out about a green roof, a cistern, or permeable pavers usually already know what they're looking for. So we're not going to focus on those BMPs as much today. So our scenario this morning, a property owner has contacted your local soil and water conservation district office requesting a site visit because of an issue they are experiencing. They are complaining of the vegetation on the corner of their building being slowly washed out and the sediment building up in the parking lot every time that it rains. Their address is 7308 Hanover Green Drive in Hanover County. So when preparing for a site visit, there are a few things that you should always do. First, locate the site on a map. Figure out the distance that you'll need to travel where they are located. 2, determine if there is a waterway nearby. So throughout this presentation, I will display one resource for every data or map that I show. This is not the only source to retrieve this information, but it's a reliable source, especially since we serve districts throughout the entire state of Virginia. So if you're looking to see what waterways are nearby, the EPA's Waters GeoViewer is a good resource to find that information. When you get there, you can put in the address up above, and it'll show you where you are and how close the waterways are. Since you're here, it's a good idea to just go ahead, click that ruler tool, and measure the distance from your site to the nearest water source. The site's proximity to that water may affect which BMP is most appropriate and help predict project eligibility on the ranking sheet. We're looking more so water sources that are within 40 feet or 100 feet. As you can tell, this water is over 3,000 feet away, so not much of a factor at all. Before a site visit, there are some other things that you can also do. One being create a topographic map to determine the storm water flow direction. So again, this is a resource that I have used. It is not the only way to retrieve the topo map, but it is a good option. Some counties may have this information available, but some may not. So when you're reading a topo map, remember that the closer the contour lines are to each other, the steeper the slope. So oppositely, the further the contour lines are away from each other, the more gentle the slope. Based on our location here on the map, I would predict that the water flows in that direction. Water will always flow perpendicular to the contour lines. You can also create a soil map to determine the type of soil in that area. So here I have used USDA's Web Soil Survey. On this map, you can put in the address here on the side. And then from here, you go up to AOI and create a polygon area of interest. And then from here, you go to the soil map. It'll show you what soils are predominant in that area. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but the site we're looking at is right there. And the soil on that site should be a sandy loam. So the more sand in a soil, the quicker the water will infiltrate down. Whereas the more clay in the soil, the slower a water will infiltrate into the ground. You could also determine if that locality has a TMDL or MS4. So that is a total maximum daily load or a municipal storm sewer system. Knowing that information may affect eligibility on the ranking sheet as well. You can also print out the site assessment checklist. This checklist is not required by VCAP, but is another great resource and a reminder of things to look for and take notes of during the site visit. I will also show you where all of these resources are on our website at the end of the presentation. So when you first get to the site, you want to listen to the property owner. Figure out what issues they are experiencing, when and where. And also figure out what their expectations of the site visit are. Walk the property if you can. If you create a topo map, see if the map matches the property layout. So I predicted from the topo map that the property would have a gentle slope down. This is the view down the property. This is the view back up. Locate the problem areas and take photos. So when you get to the problem area, figure out if there's a downspout nearby. Determining whether there is concentrated or sheet flow or an external inflow of water might affect which BMP is most appropriate for that area. Also, look for what the resource concern might be. Is it poorly vegetated cover? Is it erosion, deposition, excess runoff, or even standing water? If the resource concern is something other than what I just mentioned, that area may not be eligible for VCAP. As you can tell, it looks like some erosion right here. And then as it flows down, all that soil is deposited right here. Also, look for a stormwater conveyance, such as a storm drain or ditch nearby. Is it within 40 feet? Is it within 100 feet? Again, that information might affect project eligibility on the ranking sheet. So for example, because the water in this problem area flows to a storm drain within 40 feet, this project would receive an extra 20 points on their ranking sheet. Once you have all this information, you can look at determining which BMP might be most suitable for the issue. So, with conservation landscaping, there are some things to consider. This practice is intended to replace an impervious surface, manage turf, or invasive plants with native plants and trees to reduce polluted runoff while providing an attractive landscape. Utility lines will need to be located. It may be possible to locate some conservation landscaping over the lines, but that would need to be confirmed with the utility company. Also, think about the maintenance requirement. For conservation landscaping, there's extra hands-on maintenance in the first year that is essential for vegetation establishment. After the vegetation is established, there might be less hands-on maintenance. For rain garden, this practice is intended for disconnecting impervious surfaces from storm sewers, swales, or channels. It is used to treat runoff from smaller areas such as individual rooftops or driveways. Utility lines will need to be located and avoided. This practice cannot be placed over any utility lines. An infiltration test will need to be conducted. And the maintenance requirement. Hands-on maintenance in the first year is again essential for vegetation establishment. And similar to a vegetable garden, some hands-on maintenance is needed for the long-term survivability of the garden. Also, this practice should be placed at least 10 feet from the building foundation. For a dry well, this practice is intended to capture and treat concentrated flow or piped runoff from impervious areas. It is used to treat smaller areas such as rooftops and driveways as well. But it may not be appropriate where there is a significant risk for basement flooding. Utility lines will need to be located and avoided again. An infiltration test will need to be conducted. The maintenance is different though. For a dry well, annual check-ins are necessary for long-term survivability to make sure that the structure is functioning as it was designed. Vegetated conveyance system. This practice is intended to prevent scour and erosion and provide water quality treatment while conveying the stormwater, not to modify or channelize any existing drainage. Again, utility lines will need to be located and avoided. You'll need to do an infiltration test. Maintenance requirement has that extra hands-on maintenance in the first year. And then some maintenance is needed after the vegetation is established. For bioretention, bioretention is essentially a large scale rain garden. So all the same rules will apply here, except it is used to treat larger areas such as commercial rooftops, parking lots, multiple lots. But again, utility lines need to be avoided and located and avoided. So bioretention cannot go above any underground utility lines. An infiltration test will need to be conducted. The maintenance requirement has more hands-on maintenance in the first year to establish that vegetation. And then similar to a garden, some hands-on maintenance is needed every year. And again, at least 10 feet away from building foundation. For an infiltration, it is a large scale dry well. So all the same rules apply, except it's used to treat runoff from larger areas such as commercial rooftops, parking lots, or multiple lots. It may not be appropriate where there is a significant risk for basement flooding. Utility lines need to be located and avoided. An infiltration test needs to be conducted. And annual check-ins are necessary for the long-term survivability to ensure that this structure is working as designed. So with all that in mind, thinking back to this site visit and what we did to prepare for and what we have available, we're going to have a quick discussion on what BMP might be best.
Hey y'all, my name is Blair Blanchett, so I'm going to take over the discussion right now, and I'm hoping that y'all would be willing to participate and maybe use the chat function if you guys want to. But Darby put together some information about this site in particular. So this site is our office in Mechanicsville. She very kindly put together the options for the BMPs that you might want to look at. You can see she zoomed in more on the soil map. So Richard put a comment in the chat that you may want to zoom in a little bit more, get a little more detailed information. So Darby has that there. She circled the type of soil and then has this textural class designations for the soil here. So this is considered sandy loam. I know it's kind of tiny. And the sandier, as I'm sure some of you guys know, the sandier the soil, the better infiltration it should have. Virginia is notorious for its clay, so you absolutely want to confirm this with an infiltration test. But based on the soil map, it looks like it'll be a little more sandy. You can see again, she put some more detailed information on the photo of the resource concern. So again, always need to have a resource concern to qualify. You can see this area is about 10 feet off of the building. She lets you know the runoff area that's coming down that downspout, and then kindly circled this mystery utility box. And then in the lower right-hand corner, the red line outlines the property that we could have a BMP on. So again, we don't want to have a BMP cross property lines. That's part of the VCAP qualifications. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of time, kind of look at what Darby has provided for you here, and think about what stands out to you. So what does the soil test tell you that might exclude or include certain practices that Darby has highlighted? What might you be concerned about in looking at these photos? And start to maybe put into the chat, start to put into the chat the things that you would consider the most important. So again, use the chat, tell us what is really at top of mind, drawing your attention if you were going on a site visit with a homeowner. I used to teach online, so I am very willing to wait for answers in the chat. Awesome. So we got Dale commenting, Lowry commenting. Wonderful. Y'all got it. So Dale commented, potential infiltration next to the building would not be recommended. Lowry says, consider the foundation. And Renee is noticing that resource concern. Gutter drainage is impacting the surface. Richard says, are there other sources of runoff like the front downspouts of the building or yard? I'll give you guys a few more seconds to kind of think about what maybe stands out to you guys. All right, I think the chat's slowing down. You guys got it. So really want to consider that foundation. The phrase that shows up in the manual is hydrologically connected. We just don't want to flood somebody's foundation or cause damage to it. And like Richard said, consider other sources that maybe you could treat at the same time. Just like Darby mentioned, we really want to focus on what the homeowner is asking for. So they came to us and said, this is the issue that's most important to me, but maybe you could offer advice that could treat other runoff, protect our waterways, even if the homeowner didn't think about that initially. Richard also made a really good point that I want to highlight. Think about the direction of the utility lines. So absolutely very important because that would restrict certain practices. I honestly don't know where these utility lines go, but it's something to think about. So that all being said, working through that process, and you can work through this in your head when you're at a site visit. You don't necessarily have to have the answer right away to give to a homeowner. For those of you that are newer, maybe you want to say, my first inclination is XYZ, but let me go back to my office, think about this more, and I'll provide you recommendations when I've consulted with other folks. So don't ever feel like you need to have the answer right away, especially as you're learning. Feel free to call Darby and I or other folks that you know that are very comfortable with VCAP to help come up with the best plan of action. So let's say you've gone back, you've called Richard, you've called Darby and I, whoever your district staff friends are. What is the BMP that you would be most likely to recommend and why? And again, go ahead, use that chat. If you're a person that likes to speak out loud, you can also come off mute if you want to. But which BMP are you leaning towards? And also maybe the answer is, I don't know. And that's why I came today, in which case, perfectly acceptable answer. All right, y'all made Richard answer first. Richard says a rain garden, but I would need to measure the space available. If you all agree with Richard, you can use the reactions and give like a thumbs up. Yes, I think a rain garden is the best option here. If you think another option might work, go ahead and put it in the chat. All right, we got a couple other pieces of feedback in the chat. So one person commented, if this was a commercial site, maybe something really big, this maybe would be a good site for a dry well. Again, depends on the utility lines, but yeah, if this was a lot of runoff, that might be a good option. And Lowry and Michael also said a conservation landscaping with something like some rocks right at the outflow from that downspout, because it would help slow down that water, kind of attenuate the force of the water coming down the downspout so that it could slowly infiltrate into a conservation landscaping. And again, remember that conservation landscaping will have similar native plants to a rain garden, but it's not going to have that excavation depth and under drain the potential for using engineered soil. So it's less of that infiltration practice than a rain garden is. And let me see what Michael says. Yeah, conservation landscaping, but gotta be careful about the discharge from the gutters. Would it be necessary to armor the outlet around the gutters? Again, I think so. That's a very tall building. That water's falling really far, and it's a pretty big area, 860 square feet. So we would want to have something to protect the outfall right by that downspout. And Karen says something that gets the water away from the building, maybe a conveyance. Possibly if it's a really big area, if we had a good slope. I think step pools are really beautiful. I've already said that to Darby, but that does require an added expense and an added maintenance. So it's something to consider when talking to the homeowner, if that's something they could manage, afford, and are interested in. But I think they can be really beautiful.
I think there are a lot of limitations for the
Yes.
conveyance practice just because of how flat the site is. So
That's fair. It's hard to see, but from the angle Darby's taking this photo from, Richard knows our office well, the area behind you is relatively flat. So definitely something to think about. If it were steeper, maybe it would apply a little better. And then we have a comment about for teaching purposes, maybe a treatment train to spread out the water and sink it in is a very tight area. You are correct. So again, with VCAP, we can combine practices to kind of spread it out more. Maybe a rain garden and a conservation landscaping together are pretty common. Richard, do you want
we do want to try to have different resource concerns for each BMP. So that's the caveat with the VCAP program.
Exactly, of course.
Mhm.
Oh, and we also have a comment about the lawn mowing service would need to know what the planting is. It's very true. If you are not working with a homeowner, let's say you're at a school or a church, making sure the maintenance staff are aware or the site is very clearly labeled protected is very important. I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard of conservation landscaping just getting mowed over because it's kind of hard to turn one of those commercial mowers. So these are a lot of things to consider. And I don't mean that to complicate this. It's more just to say your first instinct is right. A lot of y'all said rain garden, we need to armor the entrance. You've got it absolutely correct. That isn't to say that something like a conservation landscaping or maybe a dry well couldn't work. It's just that would be my first inclination as well. Now, just for the sake of kind of throwing a wrench in things, would you change your answer if this homeowner was a 90-year-old man or woman and their grandchild mowed their grass? What might that change, or would it change anything at all? Oh, great job, Alan. So Alan commented, aim for a cheap practice, the least amount of maintenance. Excellent answer. Oh, you guys are great. So Lowry commented, cost effectiveness is really important. Maybe a rain garden would be too much for this person. And great, we have a comment about the rain garden shape would have to take into account the turning radius of a mower, and no weed whackers on the edges. Okay, these are great comments. And who knows, maybe that grandson is a budding horticulturist and a rain garden would be perfect. I got Richard to laugh. The other comment, let's say this was a 57-year-old former engineer. Richard has retired and now this is his property. Would that change your answer? I'll admit I have a goal here. Wonderful. If the homeowner is really into it and does their own maintenance, you can design to what they are comfortable with. Excellent answer. In particular, I want to point out in this photo in the lower right, you can actually see the sediment stream cutting across the parking lot. So we didn't talk about permeable pavers today, but maybe this would be a permeable paver location. We want to limit that sediment. If that downspout was piped into the permeable parking area, maybe it would work. Darby and I have recently met with some homeowners who are former engineers, and they're really into that permeable paver situation. So again, it kind of depends, but listening to the homeowner is really important. It's just as important as the right BMP in the right place. And, being a district staffer is about those relationships. So spend some time getting to know your homeowner as well.
And I guess another, for this particular site, in real life, it's a place of business, right? So I think we have had some applicants that are business owners. So that's another consideration to think of. Of course, they're looking for their bottom line, I guess, would be the difference between a homeowner and a business.
Yes, so. Wonderful. I actually got an email the other day about a homeowner or a business owner in this area who wanted permeable pavers. And it was from the kindness of his heart. He was close to the James. So again, just changes the conversation. So it is about 10:35. Just to kind of round this out, I'm curious if you wanted any more information, what information might you ask for? So what did we not provide in this slide that you wish you had? Oh, great. So we have a good comment on VCAP that I'll come back to, Karen. Oh, Lowry, I knew it. So Lowry, Northern Neck district staffer says, where is that water table? So of course, our practices that are those infiltration practices need to be more than 2 feet from the water table. We got a comment about maybe that homeowner comes into this with an expectation, like I want a rain garden, and they're not going to be deterred. So that might be a challenging conversation to have if it's not the right BMP. Honestly, I don't have an answer for that. That's just practice with listening and acknowledging the homeowner.
Blair, this is Judy. I think it also helps in that conversation just to remind them or reaffirm that the program is about the community benefit. So that's somewhat what you're representing. You're not just there to solve their problems, but you're trying to find that sweet spot between their concerns and what will benefit the community at large. And that's why the state, is involved to begin with.
Wonderfully said. To that point, Judy and Richard, do you want to add anything to this example that we've given? I think our chat's kind of slowed down.
No, I don't think, I guess the only other observation might be just identifying the plants that are existing, and I guess just get a better understanding on what the owner is familiar with in terms of plants, because that could be a major factor. They might not want it to be too wild looking, whatever you choose to go with.
Very fair. Wonderful. Judy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, there's a lot you can learn just observing when you first come up to the site. One thing with homeowners, I I'm aware of whether there's evidence of dogs or large dogs, because that can also affect what success, what's going on with the property itself and what success they might have. And that also could just be a reminder to myself to let them know that they may need to protect whatever they do from dog traffic, for example, or kids running through, just to make sure that they understand that the maintenance issues that might come up. And yeah, just the sort of general maintenance of the property. Everybody is a little different. Some people are, like Richard said, are very nervous about anything that looks wild, or others are very casual and don't mind clover in their grass. I mean, this photo gives me the sense that this homeowner might, want really that healthy green turf look. And, and that's just information used as you evaluate what BMP is going to work for both of you.
Wonderful.
And then I guess one last thing would be HOA requirements.
Ooh.
What they're saying.
Yes, and
Local requirements.
to that point, my dream would be that HOAs would come to love Green Gardens and recognize their value. So if you need some kind of education or help on that front, let Darby and I know. We're getting a couple different questions in the chat. And if I remember correctly, we're very close to the question slide. So Darby, do you want to leave the questions to that point, or do you want to answer them now?
I say let's maybe wait and talk about these questions on the question slide, if that's all right with everyone.
That sounds good. Back to you.
Cool. Well, thank you, Blair and Richard and Judy and everyone who participated in that discussion. It sounds like 1, more information is needed, but 2, more than one BMP could potentially be applicable to this site if maneuvered in certain ways. So when looking at what BMP might be most suitable, it depends on a few things. One is that soil's infiltration rate. So a lot of those BMPs need an infiltration test. While the soil map and the soil type is a good predictor for how quickly that soil may infiltrate water, only an infiltration test will really determine that rate. If the soil infiltrates too quickly or too slowly, the site may need engineered soil and or an underdrain. You also want to think about, as we talked about, the property owner's preference and their budget. So if engineered soil or an underdrain is required, there might be extra costs associated with that project. And you want to think about the property owner's capacity for maintenance care. All of our BMPs have a mandatory 10-year maintenance requirement. But some BMPs require a more hands-on maintenance upkeep. At this point, you can think about next steps. As Blair mentioned before, you don't have to provide all the answers at the site visit. You can go back and do more research and follow up with the property owner. While you're there, though, you can complete what you can of the ranking sheet to predict project eligibility. The ranking sheet cannot be fully completed until the application is almost complete, but if foreseeably eligible, you can provide the property owner with their next steps. So 1 is contact Miss Utility. Figure out, are there utility lines? Where are those utility lines located? They will come out and show you where those utility lines are. The property owner will also need to conduct an infiltration test and record those findings. The property owner is also the one responsible for contacting their landscaper or contractor. If you can, you should definitely follow up with this property owner after the site visit. But do remember that at the end of the day, it is their project. A site visit request form is not required by VCAP, but is a good way to filter through potentially eligible practices and properties and save time. If you do have a site request form, try to ask questions that predict VCAP eligibility. Also, ask for photos ahead of time. So all the resources that were mentioned today can be found on our website. So if you go to our website here, under District Services, there's the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. It'll bring you here. If you click on that resources for soil and water conservation districts, it'll take you here. So here is where I found that site assessment checklist. The ranking sheet is right here. The VCAP eligibility is in this district guide. The infiltration test directions are right here. So all that information can be found on our website. And then now, Blair, if you want to take on some of those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I defer to, I don't want to put you on the spot, Richard and Judy, but Richard and Judy, you are our in the field experts. So please, I would love to hear your thoughts. We have a question from Michael. Is it typical for multiple kinds of BMPs to be available to address the same problem? Do we need to default to the least cost? If they're least costly or the most technically feasible BMP?
Yeah, I would say, you know, obviously there's a lot of factors, but if the infiltration rate is good, and taking our example there, for instance, if the infiltration is good, you know, they could do multiple options. I guess for the program, I think obviously you would have to consider what the homeowner or what the applicant's abilities are. Like if they can't maintain the rain garden, then doing the dry well would make more sense. And then I think, yeah, I think looking at the yeah, it's possible that I think ranking wise, maybe everything meets the minimum ranking criteria. So I think it just depends on, you know, if it was, if we were tight on funds, then you would want to select the BMP that would give you the biggest bang for the buck. So I think obviously rain gardens and dry wells would probably meet that criteria, but maybe conservation landscaping might be a cost-effective way to address that particular problem, but wouldn't rank as high. But as long as conservation landscaping does meet that minimum ranking criteria, they could look at that as an option. And I think that's what we've seen in some applications where it looks like a rain garden, but they didn't go through the whole sizing criteria or anything, but they applied for conservation landscaping instead. So.
Judy, do you want to add to that, or are you?
Yeah, I that definitely I think sums it up really well. I think when I look at the practices, conservation landscaping is kind of its own thing, and the infiltration practices are another set. So that in my head, I kind of divide out, like, is this a potential infiltration practice? And that is generally the ranking spreadsheet does value those higher in terms of what the eventual project would rank at in the program. So that's one guideline, but certainly they're also they will tend to be more expensive for the installation and square footage. So you know, conservation landscape will work almost everywhere. I don't know that I've ever seen a place where, unless it's just incredibly a tight site and only a dry well would work or something like that. I think that's sort of a good option if nothing else works. And again, the budget of the homeowner is gonna, or property owner is gonna also play a big role.
Yeah, and I think for our example, yeah, there's probably enough space for a rain garden or a dry well, but if we really wanted an effective conservation landscaping, like to act like a filter strip, we want to have at least some sort of filtering distance through the conservation landscaping. But I think with conservation landscaping, just doing the downspout dissipation before it enters the landscaping, in a lot of cases that will address the erosion issue. So it's kind of like, well, why go further with the landscaping when doing something like that, or a rain garden would be a little bit more effective at stopping the erosion.
Mhm. Yeah, and as the district staffers, those of you attending, get more comfortable, you might feel more comfortable with that interchange. But just like Judy said, as you're starting, maybe the easiest way to think about it is like infiltration and kind of everything else. And Darby's slides at the top had an italicized section that say like, this is really the emphasis of this. So for instance, the dry well was saying impervious runoff, disconnecting that runoff. So you don't want to clog the dry well with sediment. So you wouldn't be putting like sheet flow into a dry well necessarily. Richard, maybe you could engineer something that would work. But as you're getting more comfortable, maybe looking at those italicized sections would help narrow your focus. That would be my suggestion. We got a question. Are there setbacks from property boundaries that are standardized in VCAP? I'll take this and see if I get it right, Richard and Judy, since I'm still new. There shouldn't be a property boundary setback. I mean, while being respectful of your neighbors, there is a setback from the house or the building. So 10 feet from the building to make sure we're not damaging the foundation or potentially causing a flooding issue. But theoretically, if you have a fence, you could put a conservation and landscaping up against the fence while acknowledging you might have some moisture issues if it's right against the fence. Does that track for you, Judy and Richard?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The only time that we would think about the property line and any kind of setback would be if there was an under drain or some kind of outlet from the rain garden. Say that you want the overflow to not be right on somebody's property line for neighborliness. So we have a basic rule of thumb of 10 feet from property line for any outfall like that. Anything that would be a water, where you might actually see water coming out of the practice. That wouldn't, be the case for conservation landscaping.
And I think the same rules kind of apply with even the new developments, looking at new construction, zoning wise, the zoning local ordinances don't really have any setbacks for a lot of these stormwater practices. They just don't want you to cross that boundary with the outlets. Ideally, you do want to consider, particularly if you're excavating, what type of side slopes you'd be tying back into natural grade. So that probably be the biggest thing to consider if they were doing like a swale or something along the property boundaries, just to understand where you're going to be tying into natural grade and that you don't want to encroach on your neighbor.
And we had a comment as well about conservation landscaping in reference to VDOT. So of course, if you have some kind of right of way adjacent to your property, that might change things, but between you and your neighbor that are not a state entity, the rules are a little more free form.
And there might be other easements to consider too, utility and
yes,
drainage.
I want to comment on what Betty said, and then if you have any final questions, put them in the chat now, but we're reaching kind of the end of our time. Betty made a comment about HOA requirements, and that's very common that HOAs have restrictions on what can be established on your property. So again, I have a dream, I have a goal that HOAs wouldn't be restrictive and they would see the water quality benefit, the aesthetic benefit, pollinator benefit of these practices that have plants for pollinators, but also dry wells with their water quality benefits. So it's about education, and it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time, but we can be helpful in helping educate HOAs. If you need information from Darby or myself, or you want us to field those calls from HOAs just to help, we're happy to, whatever we need to start expanding our reach, because that is a big gap right now in my mind, are the HOA requirements, but something to keep in mind before you meet with someone. Do we have any final questions? I'll give you guys about 10 seconds to raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Either type it up or unmute yourself.
Yes. Good.
HOA conflicts.
One thing I would say is that it's easy to overwhelm a property owner. So you know, you might not get the exact right BMP that you're recommending, but I think not overwhelming them is just as important. You know, saying you could do this or this or this or this, and it'll all be good. Just if you really think a rain garden, you know, you see a spot for it and it looks like it would work, and you think that they're amenable to that, you know, maybe just focus on that. And we want them to be comfortable with the process and feel good about it. And nothing is going to solve every problem that they have or every drop of rainwater. So just allowing them to feel successful, I think, is a really important part of this program.
Oh, Karen, I'm sorry. I overlooked your question, so thank you for putting it in there again. Would a non-resident family member caretaking rather than the homeowner or professional landscaper affect ranking? So no, there shouldn't be a, there isn't a question in the ranking sheet that is getting at maybe who's taking care of the property. It is a question of business, HOA, private home. So no. That being said, rental properties can become a bit of a challenge. And as of yet, I'm not aware of any practices that are on rental properties. Richard and Judy could speak more to that. That is to say that someone renting couldn't apply on behalf of their landlord. We would need the property owner's permission. Does that track, Richard?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we have any renters applying, but we've had owners of rental units applying.
Yes. Yeah, Judy, to clarify on your second statement, it's not a ranking issue with this lovely older person and their grandson, but more a matter of maybe how physically capable they are or how much they might spend. Again, that's kind of an assumption on my part, that example. I teach fitness classes and have an 86-year-old participant, and he does great. So he would violate that little example that I gave.
Yeah, I mean, some people are really engaged in their landscape, and that's great, but others, we have a beautiful conservation landscaping project I inspected a little while ago that it's just professionally maintained, and I don't know how much the property owners even know what's going on there, but you know, and they love it. It's perfect for them. So each individual, again, is going to be a little bit different how they understand the program. You know, your example of Richard retiring and building a rain garden, I mean, it would be wonderful and he'd enjoy it. But you know, not everybody even wants to understand really how they function. So again, it's our job, I think, is to find that practice that we think will be successful with the property owner we're talking with.
Richard, do you want to take Lowry's question?
Yeah, I'm guessing she's guess there's a bunch of different yeah, right now there's nothing in the ranking sheet that would elevate two separate projects, give them additional points, even though they might be adjoining and providing additional benefits by working together. And I think that's a common, Lowry is probably coming from the living shorelines area, and that's where we have had, in the past, we've had a couple applicant neighbors go ahead and apply for two or three separate living shorelines, but they were all going to be contiguous in the end for the most part. But no, yeah, we don't have anything for ranking it higher. But that's a good point to consider in the future. Yeah, and I mean, I guess it could happen with riparian buffers or some conservation landscaping practices too. I don't really see it with the other practices, the other structural practices, because usually they're standalone.
So my friends, it is 10:59. We appreciate you guys coming out today and participating in our example and whatnot. And Darby, I know you have something you want to share.
That's funny. I just wanted to thank you all for joining, and oh wait, hold on. May the BMP be with you, because it is May 4th today.
Yes.
Happy Star Wars Day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darby.
Yes,
So-
thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you to Richard and Judy, who are part of our steering committee. So these are the folks that not only are in the field doing the work that y'all do, but reviewing applications and providing that technical support to Darby and myself and association staff. So very, very grateful that y'all came out today. And Darby, wonderful webinar. You did a great job. So we're here to answer questions. Please contact us at any time, email or phone. I would love to hear from you, and looking forward to having some future trainings as we update the manual and go to our Graves Mountain training and various opportunities like that. So thanks and have a great day, y'all.